If you had lived in Saladin's time, close your eyes for a moment and let me borrow your imagination. You and I are standing at the seam between continents, where Africa leans into Asia and the Mediterranean trades salt wind with desert dust. It's the late 12th century, an age of courier riders, caravan bells, and city walls that glitter in the sun like hammered bronze. The world is stitched together by roots, the Nile that feeds Egypt like a long green spine, the coastal road that hugs the Levant from Gaza to Acre, and the inland highways that run through Damascus toward the Euphrates. Now picture this. You wake before dawn to the call to prayer rolling across rooftops, and you fall asleep to the creak of ships in harbors and the distant clatter of blacksmiths. You learn geography the way people learned it then, not from paper maps, but from the feel of it in your lungs, the damp sweetness of the Nile Valley, the sharp dryness of Sinai, the pine-scented hills of Galilee, and the brutal heat that can turn an army's march into a slow execution. In that world, one name moves like a current through every marketplace conversation and every campfire rumor. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, Saladin. To the people who follow him, he is the commander who can unite fractured lands and speak to soldiers as if they are his brothers. To his enemies, he is the patient strategist who can starve a fortress without wasting lives, then strike when thirst and fear have already done half the work. And to ordinary families living between Latin Crusader castles and Muslim dynasties, he is the weather of history. Because when he moves, the direction of attention, harvests, taxes, and even the price of bread can change. This is the story I'm about to tell you. Not a fairy tale of clean victories and heroic speeches, but a lived ground-level journey. Streets, wells, fortresses, and fields where the grass is flattened by tens of thousands of feet. I'll take you through Cairo's palaces and its crowded bridge markets, across Syria's orchards and basalt plains, into the furnace of Hattin, and finally to the long, exhausting chess game of the Third Crusade. And as I speak, I want you to feel what I would have felt if I had been there. The weight of a water skin in your hand, the roughness of dust in your teeth, and the uneasy calm that comes when a horizon fills with dust and the sound of hooves. If you stay with me, you won't just hear about Saladin's era, you'll walk through it with me, step by step. Before we begin, if you enjoy immersive documentary-style storytelling like this, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. It's the simplest way to support the series. And if you want the continuation, I genuinely need you with me. Chapter 1. Cairo, the river that makes an empire, 1169-1174. If I had landed in Saladin's world, I would start where power was turning like a wheel, Cairo. And I'd want you right beside me, because Cairo in this period isn't just a city, it's a machine that runs on water. The Nile is not a backdrop, it is the engine. When you walk the streets, you feel it everywhere. In the barges sliding past riverbank gardens, in the grain and piled in warehouses, in the canals and cisterns that decide who eats when the drought comes. I imagine arriving at dawn, when the city is still cool and the light is pale over the minarets. You'd hear vendors setting out baskets of dates and bread, and you'd smell smoke from ovens. But then the city wakes fully. Scribes hurrying toward offices, soldiers drilling in courtyards, porters hauling bales of textile, and caravans pushing in from the desert with salt, leather, and spices. Cairo is a crossroads because the river meets the sea and the desert roads meet the river. And then there is the political atmosphere, thick, tense, and watchful. In the years just before Saladin's rise, Egypt is ruled by the Fatimid Caliphate, and the old order is weakening. You would hear people speak in cautious half-sentences about court factions, about viziers who rise and fall fast, about the danger of Frankish raids from the coast. It's an anxious city because everyone senses that whoever controls Egypt's treasury and Nile grain can fund a war for the entire region. This is where Saladin enters, not as a king at first, but as a commander sent into Egypt as part of a larger struggle. I would have watched him with the eyes of ordinary people, not judging from a throne room, but from streets and barracks. He would have looked at first like another ambitious officer among many, until you notice the discipline around him. His men are not only brave, they are organized. Pay attention to details like supply lists, stable yards, and how fast messages move. In this age, organization is power. I would take you to the edge of the city where the old palaces stand, and I'd tell you, look at the contrast. The Fatimid court is ornate, filled with ceremony and inherited privilege. Saladin's circle is different, more martial, more pragmatic, more focused on unifying command. The shift isn't just political, it changes the city's rhythm. Taxes are assessed differently. Military posts change hands. Fortifications become a priority because Egypt is vulnerable from the sea and from the desert. And yes, fortifications. If you stand with me on a clear day, you can almost see why later rulers will invest so heavily in walls and citadels. Cairo sits near the desert's edge. It can be approached by armies that live off raids. Saladin begins strengthening defenses and planning a seat of power that can control both Cairo and the old garrison city of Fustat. The logic is geographic. High ground is everything, and control of river crossings is everything. A city without secure gates is a city waiting to be ransomed. But the most dramatic change I would have felt is religious and institutional. Saladin's Egypt is moving from Fatimid Shia rule toward Sunni institutions aligned with the broader Muslim world of Syria and Iraq. That sounds abstract until you witness it in daily life. Endowments redirected, scholars invited, sermons changing tone, judges appointed who interpret law differently. The city's intellectual life shifts alongside its politics. Mosques become not only places of worship, but signals of allegiance. If you and I walked through the markets, we'd hear the talk, he's consolidating. He's careful. He pays his soldiers. In a time when unpaid armies turn into predators, paying your troops is a form of mercy to your own people. And yet, we'd also hear fear, because consolidation means winners and losers. A clerk dismissed, a noble family sidelined, a soldier from another faction suddenly unemployed. These are the quiet casualties of state building. Meanwhile, the wider map keeps pressing in. To the north, Syria is still tied to the legacy of Nur al-Din, Saladin's former patron. To the west, the Crusader states hold fortified ports and inland castles, stone teeth biting into the landscape. Egypt cannot remain an isolated kingdom. It must either project power or become prey. So my first lesson to you living beside me in Cairo would be this. In Saladin's era, politics is geography made human. Whoever commands the Nile's harvest can fund cavalry, siege engines, and diplomacy. Whoever controls the coastal roads can choke an enemy's trade. Whoever keeps a disciplined army can turn uncertainty into a new dynasty. I'd also make you notice the seasons. because they govern everything. When the Nile floods, the river climbs its banks and leaves behind black silt that turns the fields into a patchwork of green. Farmers measure their lives in water levels. Officials measure the state's survival the same way. A low flood is not just bad weather, it is a political crisis that can trigger hunger, unrest, and rebellion. In the bureaucratic quarters, you would see men tallying grain stores, bargaining for imports, and calculating how many mouths a year's harvest can feed. And then there are the ports. If we traveled downriver to Alexandria, you'd feel the Mediterranean's power immediately. The salt air, the tall masts, the foreign languages on the docks. War in this era is not only fought on land, it is fought in shipyards and customs houses. A single convoy of timber or iron can decide how quickly you can build siege engines. A single raid along the coast can empty a market by disrupting trade. Saladin's planners have to think like logisticians, protect routes, stock granaries, secure shipbuilding, and keep the flow of coin steady. If you stood with me in a military yard, you'd see how an army is assembled from systems, not just courage. Horses need fodder, saddles need leather, bowstrings need careful twisting, and storage away from damp. Even simple things, nails, lantern oil, spare shoes, become life and death when you march into the desert. I'd watch Saladin's officers inspect mounts, test bows, and check the condition of pack animals. In that attention to the ordinary, you'd recognize the beginning of something larger, a ruler who treats logistics as the spine of victory. And at night, when the city quiets and the river becomes a dark ribbon under the stars, I'd tell you what I think I'd feel most strongly. The sense that history is not a distant thing. It is happening in ledgers, in granaries, in the price of bread, and in the way soldiers look at the horizon. In Cairo, you don't just watch an empire rise, you hear it in the footsteps. Chapter 2. Syria, orchards, basalt plains, and the work of unification, 1174-1186. After Cairo, I would take you north, because if you want to understand Saladin, you have to see the bridge he builds between Egypt and Syria. Imagine the journey with me. We leave the sea, river's green comfort, and ride into Sinai, where the landscape becomes a lesson in scarcity. Here, the world is rock, scrub, and wind. You plan your day by wells, not by towns. A misread distance can kill a caravan. The desert is not empty. It is monitored by guides, by tribes, by patrols, because whoever controls water points controls movement. When we finally reach the Levant, the land changes in a way you can feel in your bones. The coastal plain is humid and busy, lined with groves and ports. Inland, the hills rise and the air cools. Syria is a mosaic. Fertile river valleys beside harsh steppe. Cities wrapped in orchards beside castles that command bare ridges. This geography produces political fragmentation. Every corridor can be held by a different lord. Every mountain pass can become a toll gate. Damascus would be our anchor. If you've never stood in Damascus, picture a city that seems to breathe through gardens. The Barada River threads life into the Ghouta orchards, and the city sits like a jewel inside a green halo. There, power is not only military, it is administrative. You would watch scribes record land grants, judges arbitrate disputes, and merchants negotiate credit with a sophistication that feels surprisingly modern. Damascus has been a capital before, and it knows how to behave like one. Now, place Saladin in this setting in 1174, after the death of his former patron Nur al-Din. The region is suddenly a contested inheritance. I would feel the tension immediately. Rival commanders, wary city elites and families asking the same question in private: who will protect us without devouring us? Saladin's challenge is not to win one battle. It is to convince cities to accept his authority without turning the whole region into a civil war. This is where you would see the unglamorous craft of medieval state building. Saladin negotiates. He marries alliances. He sends letters that are as important as swords. He offers amnesty to some rivals and pressure to others. He reorganizes garrisons and assigns fiefs, iktai, to bind warriors to the state. If you and I sat in a courtyard listening to officials, you'd hear them talk about revenue the way modern planners talk about budgets. An army is an expensive organism. It eats coin and grain. You must feed it, or it will feed on your own people. Travel with me to the north, toward Hama and Homs, and you'll notice the terrain harden. Basalt fields darken the soil. The Orontes River cuts a route through contested land. Here, castles are not romantic ruins. They are instruments. A fortress controls roads, harvests, and tax flows. And over the landscape, like punctuation in stone, stand crusader strongholds, Crac des Chevaliers, for example, positioned to watch passes and drain movement into predictable channels. I would take you to a ridge where you can see why these castles matter. They are not only defenses, they are mechanisms that shape the economy of the land around them. Saladin answers this, not with reckless charges, but with a pressure strategy. He raids to test defenses, isolates garrisons, and builds political legitimacy so that when he does besiege, he does so with allies and supplies, not with desperation. You'd see siege camps organized like temporary cities, tents in rows, guards posted, engineers measuring distances, sappers digging, and scouts riding continuous loops. Siege warfare is slow mathematics. How many days of food? How many arrows? How many beams for towers? How many animals to haul stones? And then there is the shadow world. If we rode into the mountains near the Syrian coast, I would warn you about a name spoken quietly, the Nizari Ismailis, known in the West as the Assassins. Their fortresses cling to high places. Their politics is not field battles. It is selective fear. In Saladin's time, they can threaten commanders with a dagger in the night and reshape decisions without marching an army. I imagine the unease of sleeping in a tent after hearing that a rival leader once woke to a blade pressed near his throat. It changes how you trust. It changes how you govern. What I'd want you to understand is how landscape and logistics shape Saladin's choices. Syria's winters can be wet and cold. Roads become mud, and campaigning slows. Summers dry the grass. Cavalry needs fodder, and water becomes decisive. Armies follow harvest calendars because they depend on local grain. Even religion and morale are tied to geography. The pilgrimage routes, the shrines, the Friday sermons in major mosques that declare whose name is mentioned as legitimate ruler. By the mid-1180s, if you were with me, you'd feel the shift. The patchwork begins to stitch together. Egypt and Syria are no longer separate theaters. They become one strategic system. When Saladin can move men and money across that system, the Crusader states are suddenly facing an opponent who can coordinate pressure from multiple directions. Let me give you one concrete scene, because it matters. Picture us riding into Aleppo's shadow, a city of hard stone and harder politics. Its citadel rises like a ship's hull above the streets, and the families inside remember that they have ruled before and might rule again. Saladin cannot simply crush Aleppo without bleeding his own legitimacy, because Muslims are watching. So what do? You tighten the ring, you cut certain roads, you make the cost of resistance climb. Then you offer terms that allow local elites to retain dignity and stability while acknowledging new authority. You would see the same logic in the far northeast, toward Mosul. Full conquest is not always the goal. Sometimes securing recognition, tribute, or neutrality is the smarter win. Diplomacy becomes a weapon. Letters sealed with authority, emissaries carrying gifts, promises made in the language of faith and law. And between these cities, the infrastructure matters. We would stop in caravanserais, stone courtyards where travelers sleep beside their animals and where news runs faster than any army. In Saladin's age, information is the bloodstream of strategy. And one evening, in Damascus, as we listen to water in the canals and watch lanterns flicker along the streets, I would tell you the quiet truth I think I'd learned there. Unification is a form of warfare. It is slower than battle, but it changes the future more permanently. Saladin is not only preparing to fight crusaders, he is preparing to make it impossible for his own world to fall apart while he fights them. Chapter 3. Hattin and Jerusalem. Heat, thirst, and the turning of a century. 1187. If you want one moment where geography grabs an army by the throat, it is the campaign that ends at Hattin. I would bring you there in my mind as if we are riding with the scouts, because maps don't explain it the way the land does. Start with the setting. Galilee in midsummer. The hills are dry, the grass brittle. Springs and wells are not scenery. They are strategic objectives. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem depends on holding fortified points and staying close to water sources. Saladin understands this with a clarity that feels almost modern. He doesn't need to smash every castle. He needs to move the enemy where the enemy can't drink. Before the battle, I imagine standing with you near the Sea of Galilee, Lake Tiberias, watching the blue water shimmer under a white sun. The lake looks generous, but the approaches around it can be controlled. Roads funnel movement. High ground offers observation. In this era, a commander who can force a march away from water is a commander who can write the enemy's ending. Saladin lures the Crusader field army out by threatening Tiberias. The leadership debates. Some urge caution, stay near reliable water, force Saladin to attack fortified positions. Others argue that honor and urgency demand relief. If I were there, I would feel the fatal weight of that decision, because it is the kind of decision armies make when politics and pride push against logistics. Now, walk with me on the march. The Crusader army moves under heat that feels like a hand pressing down on your skull. Horses sweat and foam. Men and mail feel the metal turn into a furnace. Their columns stretch, and every delay multiplies thirst. Saladin's forces, light cavalry and archers used to mobile warfare, circle and harass. They do not need immediate victory. They need time and dryness. When we reach the area near the horns of Hattin, two volcanic hills rising like broken teeth, you'd see how the landscape narrows options. Behind you is the road you came from. Ahead is the hope of reaching water near the lake. Around you are slopes that can be peppered by arrows. Saladin's men move like a net tightening. They cut off springs, they burn grass to throw smoke into the enemy's face, and they keep distance where heavy cavalry can't deliver a clean charge. I want you to understand the physics of that day. Thirst reduces coordination. Heat reduces patience. Smoke reduces vision. Archery reduces morale. Once morale fractures, formations break. And once formations break, heavy armor becomes less protection and more prison. That is why Hattin is remembered not just as a battle, but as an engineered collapse. If you were beside me, you'd hear it. The hiss of arrows, the groans of exhausted animals, the shouts of officers trying to keep lines together. You'd smell burned grass and sweat. And then, as the Crusader army is forced into desperate attacks, you'd watch Saladin's forces close in, capturing standards, capturing commanders, capturing that symbol the Crusaders prize, the true cross, taken from their ranks as a trophy of victory. After Hattin, the map changes fast. Fortresses begin to fall, not because each is assaulted with equal effort, but because the field army, the mobile shield of the kingdom, has been shattered. When I imagine traveling with Saladin's forces, then I don't picture mindless plunder. I picture an organized campaign where garrisons are offered terms, where surrender is weighed against the cost of siege, and where speed matters because the enemy's reinforcements could come by sea. And then Jerusalem. I want to take you to the ridges around the city, where the stone walls glow in the sun and the air carries the scent of dust and olive trees. Jerusalem is not just a prize, it is a nerve center of faith for multiple religions. That makes the siege political in the deepest sense. A massacre would satisfy some passions but poison the future. Saladin knows this. So when the city's defenders, led by figures like Balian of Ibelin, negotiate, the outcome becomes a managed surrender rather than an annihilation. If you had stood with me when the gates opened, you would have seen something rare in medieval conquest: controlled order, ransom systems, escorted departures, protection for many civilians. Not perfect, not painless, but different in character from the blood-soaked reputation of earlier captures. Holy sites are guarded. Authority is re-established. The city's daily life begins to restart under new rulers who understand that Jerusalem must be governed, not merely taken. That is the feeling I would carry away from 1187. Not triumph alone, but the sensation of a century turning. You can almost hear Europe reacting across the sea as news travels, slowly but inevitably, toward the courts that will call for a new crusade. And you can feel the Levant holding its breath, because everyone knows that the story is not over. A victory like Hattin does not end a war. It changes the scale of the next one. Let's get even more specific, because the details are what make this era feel real. The Crusader host begins near the springs at La Saphoria, Sepphoris, a place with dependable water. From there to Tiberias is not an impossible march on paper, but in July, heat, it becomes a contest of minutes. Saladin's scouts and light cavalry keep them moving and bleeding. Small attacks that force the heavy knights to turn, regroup, and lose precious time. Each regrouping costs water. Each decision to protect the baggage train slows the whole column. And when the final collapse comes, it is also personal. Captured leaders are brought before Saladin's pavilion. In the chronicles, you read about King Guy of Lusignan taken alive, about the relics and banners, and about the fate of Reynold of Chatillon, whose raids and provocations had made him infamous, being dealt with directly by Saladin rather than by a mob. Even here, command discipline matters. A leader who can prevent victory from turning into uncontrolled slaughter is already thinking about the next month of rule. At Jerusalem, engineering is as decisive as courage. The city's defenses are shaped by valleys. Kidron to the east, Hinnom to the south and west, and by ridges that channel attackers toward certain points. Siege engines must be hauled, cut, and assembled under threat. You would see mangonels and catapults crewed by specialists, each throw adjusted, each crew trained. You would see sappers protected by shields as they dig toward weak points. And you would see defenders counter-digging, listening for vibrations in the earth. If I were there with you, I think the most haunting moment would be the silence after the bargaining is done, the moment when both sides realize that the city will change hands, and the question becomes how many lives will be spared by reason. Chapter 4, the Third Crusade, Acre, Arsuf, and the Long Negotiation, 1189-1192. If Chapter 3 felt like a door slamming shut at Hattin, Chapter 4 is what happens when that door is kicked from the outside with enormous force. Because after Jerusalem falls, Europe does not respond with one army. It responds with a wave, kings, fleets, and money, aimed at the Levant like a spearhead. If you were with me then, I would take you first to Acre, because Acre becomes the hinge of the whole war. Look at the geography. A port city with walls backed by the sea, capable of being supplied by ships. That matters, because control of ports is control of lifelines. The Crusaders can lose inland battles and still keep a foothold as long as their fleets can feed them. Saladin knows this, which is why he tries to contain and starve the Crusader siege without exposing his own forces to a decisive blow. Now, imagine the siege as a city eaten itself. Two rings form. Crusaders outside trying to break in, Saladin's army outside them trying to break the siege. Between the rings are trenches, palisades, and constant skirmishes. Disease spreads. Food shortages spike prices. Engineers build and rebuild catapults as timber splinters under counterfire. And all the while, the sea keeps delivering newcomers, some noble and well-equipped, others desperate, and many unprepared for the climate and the filth of a long encampment. This is where documentary reality replaces heroic myth. You don't win a siege like Acre through valor alone. You win through supply, morale management, and the ability to endure a year of misery. If I were there, the sound that would define Acre for me would be not trumpets, but coughing, an endless chorus of sickness, and the thud of stones hitting walls. When the great kings arrive, Richard of England and Philip of France, the war acquires new energy and new ego. Leadership becomes crowded. Rivalries appear inside the Crusader camp. On Saladin's side, pressure is constant. He must keep armies in the field, pay them, feed them, and prevent fatigue from turning into desertion. Remember what we saw in Cairo. Treasury and grain are still weapons. This is where the state he built is tested. Acre eventually falls to the Crusaders in 1191, and the coast begins to shift. Richard is a battlefield commander with an acute sense of timing. If you were beside me during the campaign south from Acre, I would point out the terrain, the narrow coastal plain with the sea to one side and hills to the other. Richard keeps his troops close to the water, supported by ships, because he understands supply in the same cold-blooded way Saladin does. Then comes Arsuf. I would describe it to you as a collision between two military ecosystems. Saladin's forces rely on mobility, harassment, and the gradual erosion of discipline. Richard's army relies on cohesion, armored shock, and the timing of a controlled cavalry charge. Along the route, Saladin's archers and light cavalry probe constantly, trying to peel units away and break the formation. Richard resists the temptation to chase, He holds a tight marching order, infantry and crossbowmen protecting the flanks, knights waiting for the moment when a charge will be decisive rather than wasteful. The decisive moment at Arsuf is not magic. It is stress meeting restraint. When part of Richard's line can no longer endure the harassment, charges begin, and Richard turns that into an organized assault rather than a chaotic pursuit. Saladin withdraws in good order, but the signal is clear. The Crusaders can win field engagements under certain conditions. The war, from here, becomes a contest of conditions, and that is the central truth of this phase. Neither side can get everything it wants. Saladin cannot easily eject the Crusaders from the coast while their fleets supply them. Richard cannot easily take Jerusalem while Saladin can scorch the land, cut water sources, and harass supply lines inland. Each approach toward the holy city becomes a test of weather, morale, and logistics. The winter rains turn roads to mud. Summer dries the wells. Armies hesitate because a single failed march can mean starvation. So diplomacy begins to run alongside warfare like a second river. Envoys travel. Terms are proposed and rejected. Hostages and prisoners become bargaining chips. And across these negotiations, you would sense something surprisingly human. Fatigue. Not cowardice, fatigue. Men who have marched, sieged, and bled for years begin to want an end that preserves something. The climax is not a final battle for Jerusalem. It is a settlement. In 1192, a truce is reached. The Crusaders retain a strip of coast, while Jerusalem remains under Muslim control with arrangements that allow Christian pilgrims access. It is not a victory song. It is a negotiated pause. I should also be honest about the uglier edges, because documentary means we don't look away. After Acre's surrender, the handling of prisoners becomes a brutal point of no return, executions that harden attitudes on both sides and make later mercy harder to imagine. In the camps, you would feel how quickly moral language gives way to fear and revenge when thousands of lives are involved. And there is Jaffa, where the war briefly flares again in 1192. The city sits on the coast like a key in a lock. When Saladin threatens it, Richard launches a fast, risky response, landing troops from the sea, organizing defenses almost on the shoreline. It is a reminder that in this crusade, ships are not just transport. They are mobile fortresses that can suddenly place soldiers where roads would take days. Standing there, watching waves hit the sand beside men in armor, you would understand how maritime power can bend land warfare into new shapes. If you ask me what I would carry from this period, what I would tell you as we walked away from the camps and back into the ordinary streets, I would say this: Saladin's greatness is not that he never loses. He does lose towns. He loses momentum at times. His greatness is that he keeps the system together under relentless pressure. He fights, he negotiates, he rebuilds, and he refuses to gamble everything on one dramatic throw. And when Saladin dies not long after, in 1193, the feeling would be bittersweet. The man is gone, but the geography remains. The ports, the roads, the wells, the hills. Empires rise and fall, but the land keeps teaching the same lesson. Whoever understands it survives. Closing. If this journey pulled you into Saladin's world, please subscribe and like the video. It directly tells me to continue this series. And if you want, leave a comment with the next era or location you'd like to walk through together.